have we hit a point in the manufacturing industry where the ability to make parts and make chips just isn't enough to compete? What's up guys, Ian Sandusky from Lakewood Machine and Tool, back here again for Practical Machinist. And today on Machine Shop Talk, we're gonna be diving into exactly that question. But before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications below to make sure you never miss a video. Let's get into it. Okay guys, so today on Shop Talk, we're going to be diving into the Practical Machinist forums to tackle a little bit of an esoteric question. It's a bit of a big one, but hopefully you guys find it interesting because I found the discussion on this very interesting. I was reading the shop management and ownership subforum on the Practical Machinist forums, and a guy had came on. He sounded like a younger, maybe more novice machinist because he was asking some pretty basic company startup questions. He was saying that he'd been in the trade for a little bit and he wanted to know the feasibility of starting his own shop. A lot of people ask questions like this. It's always great to pick people's brains on best practices for starting a company or whatever. The Practical Machinist forums are awesome for this kind of information. But specifically, this guy was asking, he wanted to put a couple machines in his garage, and he came on asking, hey listen, I really want to be a prototype shop. What should I look at to become a prototype shop? So for those of you guys who are a little newer to the trade, or maybe don't know the business aspect of things as much, back in the day there used to be kind of two tiers of shops. So you would have your production shops. Your production shops were the very, very large, think the giant companies that really specialized in making tens or hundreds of thousands of parts, or even just thousands of parts. These shops usually had a bit of a slower turnaround because they're producing thousands of parts, and their price points were geared towards these higher quantities or higher volumes. So while their price point on lower quantities might not be so good, these were the kind of companies that really geared themselves towards giving good price at large quantities, usually with longer timelines. Because you don't want to order 10,000 parts if you're an engineer before you've had a chance to try out your assembly or try out the component or go through and test something. These companies, because they had such big timelines and because they did such large quantities of parts, really weren't so good at doing the onesie twosie one-off prototype runs. So there was kind of a niche for these shops called prototype shops, and they really specialized in doing the one-off part. So an engineer would go to the prototype shop, get his 1 to 5 parts made, test it out, maybe make a couple changes, maybe get that made again, and then go to a production shop and say, I know this part works, you guys do the production run. The reason it worked is because, as you guys know who do quoting, the price structure on a job that has a long timeline and a high quantity is a lot different than a part that has usually a very fast turnaround and a low quantity. So because these companies who did the prototype work knew that this work had to be turned around fast, and they knew that it's 1 to 5, 10 parts, very low quantity, you could charge a premium on doing that work. So that premium price point became very attractive to a lot of companies. So there were quite a few prototype shops. If you guys will notice right now that I've been using past tense, I'm saying this how it used to be, I'm talking that way for a reason. This isn't by mistake. It's my opinion and the opinion of a lot of people that this system as it existed with prototype shops and production shops doesn't really exist in the way it used to. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, because there's still shops that specialize in rapid prototyping. There's still shops that specialize in one-off parts. But the whole prototype shop, production shop, I personally don't really think that dynamic exists anymore. But anyway, it was really interesting because some people came on this thread and started chiming in on this guy, giving him some advice on what a prototype shop does and things you should do and things you shouldn't do. And this one guy came on and he sounded like he had been in the trade based on what he talked about, let's call it 40 years. And he specialized for the last 40 years in prototyping. And You know, he said he's done everything from dental prototyping. He has a shop, it sounds like he might even be a one-man show, but lots of really specialized machines. Really specializes in doing one-off, quick turnaround stuff for a lot of companies. And clearly he's been successful at it because he's been doing it for 40 years. You don't stay in business for 40 years unless you're doing something right. I found it really interesting because he came on and instead of just giving advice to this guy, he kind of went and ran down through his story of what's happened to the rapid prototyping or the prototype shop sub-industry. And the way he put it was this. He said back in the day when he started, this was prior to CNC. So CNC machines weren't around. So you had manual guys. So for your prototype work, you had to go get work done at a manual shop. And these guys who specialize in rapid prototyping had to do everything by hand. So you had guys who, you know, were using dividing heads on a mill. They were using sign plates. They were using all those kind of manual tricks and tips and, you know, skills that maybe guys don't know as much today. But because of that, you were competing on the basis of that skill against other shops. So if you were the best at doing dividing head stuff, or you were the best at doing, you know, grinding complex profiles, you would usually win the work because you were competing against other guys on that same skill set. So if you were the best, you could do the best work. You could probably do it the fastest. You got the work. That's kind of how it was. It was a meritocracy. Then he said came CNC. And what CNC did to the dynamic of that was that at first, if you guys don't know, CNC machines used to be crazy expensive when they first came out. Crazy, crazy expensive. But because CNC, you know, it's really geared towards production and it's geared towards doing complex stuff, it allowed companies to do more and be more competitive. But because, you know, CAD CAM hadn't really come into itself yet, you know, learning how to use these machines was still very difficult to do. It was still competing a bit on a skill to skill basis. It wasn't, you know, a race to the bottom or anything. It was still who's the most skilled with CNC. So it still had that same kind of dynamic. Then he said CAD CAM, you know, the Mastercams, the Fusions, the Vericut, all those of the world really started to grow up and become more user-friendly and become easier to use. This is when you saw guys, you know, and this is kind of just a history of the trade, but specifically with prototyping, now it wasn't so much a skill-to-skill basis competition for work anymore, because, you know, CAD CAM allowed guys who were less experienced or less skilled, you know, manually or with, you know, NC coding, to be able to go and compete with the really skilled guys. So it really kind of brought down the ceiling in terms of the skill-to-skill competition, and now it became more the price point. Then you got into more affordable CNC machines. Now guys could put a machine on the floor and it didn't cost them $1 million. So now you got a scenario where a guy can put a machine on the floor for a reasonable price, can learn CAD CAM, and all of a sudden he can compete with the master machinist from 20 years ago and be successful. It really killed the skill-to-skill competition. Then he said, you know, came along 3D printing, which apparently just decimated the rapid plastic prototyping industry. And now he said, you know, with the metal 3D printing, I mean, we're all kind of seeing this a bit, but metal 3D printing is also kind of disrupting the metal prototyping arena. So basically what this guy was saying in describing his story of running a prototype shop was that the prototype shop dynamic does not exist as it used to. The competition is different. The metrics on which you compete are different. And essentially he said, and I thought this was very insightful, that the ability as a prototype shop to be there and make a part is not competitive anymore. It used to be that if there were 10 shops in an area, only 2 were even capable of producing this part that a company needed doing because there was a skill there. He said now the ability to produce that part, 10 out of 10 shops could do it. So the ability to make a part is no longer competitive. It's not enough. You know, and what this really comes down to is that if you don't find a way to differentiate yourself and drive work, just existing, you know, being able to turn on the lights and make parts and make chips isn't enough today to be competitive. this really kind of confirmed to me something that I've advocated for in some of these videos before and in conversations with people, but maybe I didn't have the words for that this guy really did a great job of driving home. And that's that if you don't have a lane to compete in, if you were competing in the general market of we make parts, it is not enough these days to guarantee work to sustain your business. It's not enough to guarantee work to be successful. It's not even enough to guarantee enough work to put food on the table. You know, for instance, guys, you know, I own Lakewood Machine and Tool. There is nothing here at Lakewood that we do, and I will say this honestly, that probably 100 other shops in Ontario, the province we're in, can do. There is nothing that we do that probably 100,000 other shops in the world could do. There's nothing. There's nothing that we do so sophisticated or so well or so cheaply or at such a high quality or such a fast turnaround that probably a dozen other shops within 100 kilometers of here couldn't also do. So the question then becomes, well, why does my company have a reason to exist then? On a dollar to dollar or a timeline to timeline basis, if those were the only two metrics that we were competing on, we would not have a reason to exist. And I feel like this is true for a lot of companies. This is not true for just my company. You know, we're not some martyr company who's a zombie just dragging along. This is true for a lot of companies. You know, a lot of companies, if they were forced to compete on the basis of just cost or timeline, are not going to have a reason to be successful, let alone exist for 30 years. These days, it's really not enough to be a company that just makes parts. As I said, you have to find that other lane and that differentiating factor to make you different. So to go back to the example of my company, Lakewood is not always the fastest. We're not always the cheapest. We're not even always the highest quality compared to some of the stuff out there. What we do focus on is giving the highest level of customer service and the best experience in working with a machine shop that we possibly can. So when you work with a company like mine, or for instance, my company, I'm trying to focus on, we are communicative. So if an engineer wants a part done, we talk them through the process. We are very communicative at, hey, if you change these two features, we can save you some money. Hey, I don't know if you've noticed this problem here. You know, as opposed to being a big monolithic company that just accepts RFQs and spits out quotes, we really try to develop the relationships and focus on making, you know, our goal is that if you work with our company, you're not gonna wanna go anywhere else because you had the best possible experience you've ever had working with a machine shop. And that's how we try to differentiate ourselves. Some other examples of ways to differentiate yourself. You know, some companies are the most knowledgeable about a product or an industry. So you have the companies that, you know, they may not be the fastest, they may not be the cheapest, they may not whatever, but they know everything about this one kind of machine that they build parts for better than anybody else. They are the company that, you know, if you go to them and you're trying to fix your car or your whatever, you know that if you deal with them, they're so knowledgeable that you're gonna get the right parts, you know they're gonna be correct, you're not gonna have to worry about anything because these people know what they're doing. Or for instance, they carve a niche for themselves. So, you know, this company, again, may not be the fastest, may not be the cheapest, but they are the best micro manufacturing company out there. And if you want electronics work done and you need some PCB drilled, you know that this company is gonna have every hole where it's supposed to be. You know that every hole is gonna be properly deburred. You know that if you give them, I don't know, your assemblies, that they can go and do everything they need to do because they are the best at what they do. This is really the only thing you can focus on these days, because just existing and making parts, if you want to compete on the basis of, hey, we can put holes in a piece of metal, maybe cheaper than that guy, you're in for a slog. You are now basically, like we've done videos on the race to the bottom, that's where you're gonna find yourself because you have no other ability to compete. You need to find and really lean into the strengths that your company brings to the table. You know, lean into your interests. If you are, for instance, a company named TMR, they do all Jeep parts. If they were trying to compete with every kind of automotive company out there, it would be a really tough thing. Instead, they focus on one kind of Jeep or one kind of automotive part, and they only make stuff for rock crawling Jeeps, or they only make stuff for tour trucks. They don't try to compete with everybody out there under the sun because, again, you'd just be racing to the bottom. So anyway, guys, I thought this was a very, very interesting conversation. You know, to sum it up, to respond to the guy's question who was asking about prototype shops. Prototype shops aren't dead any more than a job shop is dead, any more than a production shop is dead. You just need to be very intentional in what you are doing, because if you just say, I want to open a machine shop that makes parts, you're now competing with every other shop that makes parts. You need to find a way to differentiate yourself and really lean into your strengths in order to be successful. In any case, guys, I'd love to know in the comments below. You know, there are a lot of guys who watch this who have been in the trade for a long time. There are a lot of guys who own shops. I know there's some of you guys out there who are starting shops. I'd like to know in the comments below some of the ways that you're focusing on making your company different, and some of the things you've tried to lean into to really differentiate yourself from the other companies out there, and what you've seen work and what you've seen not work. You know, for instance, guys, we tried to start a Lakewood Machine and tool clothing brand for about a hot minute because I thought it would make us a little different. It was the worst idea ever. That's a bad idea. Feel free to share the bad ideas below as well, because, you know, someone else probably has that idea and at least you can tell them it doesn't work. It helps everybody. Okay? Thank you very much for watching, guys. As always, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications below to make sure you never miss a video. You take care.